"You can handle all 5 of us?" asked the women living in the cabin the giant rancher just bought. He thought he was buying an empty shack in the high mountains. But when the door swung open, 5 desperate women stood inside, staring him down with fire in their eyes, alone, starving, and clinging to the only roof they had left. At first, he wanted them gone. But a promise made in the lamplight turned strangers into something more until a knock on the door brought a railroad man with papers that could strip them of everything. Now, the giant rancher and these 5 women must fight through snow, fire, and fear to hold on to the only home they've ever known. Secrets buried in old claim papers, a ruthless company determined to drive them out, and a town that whispers about scandal in every saloon. When fists, faith, and fire collide, what will it take to keep a family together on the edge of the frontier? And can one man really handle all 5 when the world comes to tear them apart? Before we begin, share a piece of your world in the comments. Your city, your energy. It's a powerful thing, being part of something bigger than ourselves. The late afternoon, snow fell thick and steady as Lucas Hale stood in the cabin's doorway, his massive frame nearly filling the entrance. The lamplight cast dancing shadows on the weathered walls, illuminating 5 pairs of eyes that stared back at him with a mixture of fear and determination. His own shock at finding the cabin occupied warred with his innate sense of decency. The eldest of the women, who had introduced herself as Amelia Price, remained standing. Her simple dark dress was clean but worn, and her spine was straight as a fence post despite the clear exhaustion in her face. The other 4 women huddled closer together near the cabin's small pot-bellied stove, their breaths visible in the chilly air. "As I said," Amelia continued, her voice steady, "we have nowhere else to go. The mining company gave us 3 days to clear out of company housing after the accident." Her hands, rough from work, twisted together briefly before she forced them still. "Used what little savings we had to survive these past weeks." Lucas removed his snow-dusted hat, buying time to think as he brushed it against his leg. The cabin was rightfully his. Now he'd paid good money for it at the county auction just hours ago. But the thought of forcing 5 women out into the bitter cold gnawed at his conscience like a hungry wolf. "The mine collapse," he said slowly. "That was the Cave Creek disaster." He'd heard talk of it in town, how the support beams had given way without warning, trapping 12 men below ground. Only 3 had made it out alive. Amelia's chin lifted slightly. "Yes, our husbands and brothers were among the 9 lost." Her voice caught for just a moment before she steadied it. "The company claims no responsibility, says they signed contracts. Accepting the risks, we've been left with nothing but each other." One of the younger women let out a quiet sob, quickly muffled. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, his large frame making the floorboards creak beneath his boots. The cabin was small, barely big enough for his ranch hands, let alone 5 women trying to make a home. But these weren't drifters or troublemakers. They were honest women who'd lost everything through no fault of their own. "There's a storm coming," he said gruffly, looking out at the thickening snow. A bad one, by the feel of it. He'd grown up reading weather signs in these mountains, and everything pointed to this being more than a simple squall. "We know," Amelia replied. Her eyes met his directly, and in them he saw not just desperation, but dignity. "That's why I'm asking, will you handle having all 5 of us here, at least until the storm passes?" Lucas ran a hand over his face, feeling the day's stubble beneath his palm. The smart thing would be to insist on his property rights, give them a few dollars for their trouble, and send them on their way. That's what most men would do. But something in Amelia's steady gaze reminded him of his late wife, Sarath. Same quiet strength in the face of adversity. "The roof leaks in the corner," he found himself saying, "and that stovepipe needs cleaning before it becomes a fire hazard." He paused, then added more softly, "But you can stay for now, at least, until we figure something else out." The relief that flooded Amelia's face was quickly masked, but Lucas caught it. She nodded once, formally. "We'll earn our keep. We may be mining families, but we know how to work." "I reckon you do at that," Lucas agreed. He looked around the cabin's interior, noting the swept floor and organized supplies. These women hadn't just been hiding here, they'd been trying to make it a home. One of the younger women had risen and was adding wood to the stove. The familiar domestic sound seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. Another was quietly smoothing a worn quilt on one of the narrow beds pushed against the wall. "I'll need to bring my cattle up here come spring," Lucas said, wanting to be clear. "That's why I bought the place. It's good grazing land in the high meadow." "We understand," Amelia assured him. "We won't interfere with your work." She hesitated, then added, "And we're grateful, Mr. Hale. Truly." Lucas nodded awkwardly, unused to gratitude. "I'll ride back tomorrow, bring some supplies. That stovepipe needs fixing before you use it much more." He settled his hat back on his head, preparing to leave. "Lock the door after me. Storm or not, these mountains can attract rough types sometimes." "We will," Amelia promised. Then, with a hint of dry humor in her voice, she added, "Though I doubt many would brave this weather just to bother 5 mining widows." Lucas found himself almost smiling as he turned to go. At the doorway, he paused. "Mrs. Price, yes, I'm sorry about your menfolk. The mine collapse, it wasn't right. How the company handled it." Her face softened slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. That means something, coming from a man who clearly knows the value of honest work." As Lucas mounted his horse and started down the snowy trail, he couldn't help glancing back at the cabin. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney, and warm lamplight glowed in the single window. 5 women with nothing but each other, making do with what little they had. His practical nature told him he was a fool for letting them stay. But something else, something that felt like Sarah's gentle influence, whispered that he'd done right. The snow was falling harder now, and his horse picked its way carefully down the narrow path. Lucas hunched his broad shoulders against the cold, already mentally listing the supplies he'd need to bring tomorrow. The cabin's roof wouldn't fix itself, and that stovepipe was a real concern. He had responsibilities now, whether he'd planned on them or not. Behind him, in the gathering dusk, the cabin's light glowed like a beacon in the wilderness. 5 women were saying their prayers tonight with real shelter over their heads. And somehow, that made the cold ride home a little warmer. The cabin's interior grew darker as evening settled in, broken only by the warm glow of the lamp and the occasional spark from the wood stove. Lucas sat at the rough-hewn table, his large frame making the wooden chair creak beneath him. The quiet domestic sounds of the women moving about the small space filled what would have been an awkward silence. 2 of the younger women's sisters, by their similar features, worked together at the stove, one stirring a pot while the other cut the last of their potatoes into thin slices. The familiar scent of cooking beans wafted through the air, though Lucas could tell from the size of the pot that they were stretching their provisions mighty thin. Amelia moved with quiet efficiency, setting out the few tin plates they possessed. Her movements were precise, almost formal, as if serving a meal to a stranger in their midst helped maintain some sense of dignity. The lamplight caught the silver threading through her dark hair, pulled back neatly despite the long day. "It ain't much," she said, ladling the stew into his plate first, as custom dictated for the man of the house, though this wasn't rightly his house yet, not in the ways that mattered. "But you're welcome to share what we have." Lucas nodded his thanks, watching as she served smaller portions to the other women. They settled around the table and on the floor near the stove, balancing their plates on their laps. The youngest couldn't have been more than 18, and she kept stealing nervous glances his way. "Have you managed?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. "Since the mine collapse?" The women exchanged glances before Amelia spoke. "We've done what honest work we could find. Taken in laundry from the merchants in town, helped birth calves at the Thompson place." She took a small bite of stew, chewing thoughtfully. "Mrs. Henderson at the general store lets us mend clothes for stew. Credit, we get by. We get by." "Barely," one of the sisters muttered, then flushed when Amelia shot her a warning look. Lucas ate slowly, the simple fare reminding him of his own lonely meals since Sarah's passing. He'd gotten used to cold beans and coffee, too tired after long days of ranch work to bother with proper cooking. The stew, though spare, was well seasoned. Someone here knew their way around a kitchen. "The mine company," he said carefully. "They offered no compensation." A bitter smile touched Amelia's lips. "They claimed the contracts our men signed protected them from liability. Said they weren't responsible for acts of God, as they called it." She set her spoon down with deliberate control. "Though it seems to me poorly maintained support beams had more to do with it than the Almighty." The youngest woman sniffled, and one of the sisters reached over to squeeze her hand. Lucas recognized the raw grief in their face, seen it in his own mirror often enough after Sarah died. As the evening deepened, the women began preparing for sleep. They unrolled thin blankets near the hearth, creating makeshift pallets with practiced efficiency. Lucas rose from the table, suddenly aware of how his presence complicated their normal routine. "I'll bed down in the shed," he said firmly when Amelia began to protest. "Got my bedroll, and it's sturdy enough. You ladies keep the cabin." Relief flickered across the younger women's faces, though they tried to hide it. Amelia walked him to the door, her voice low. "You don't have to do that, Mr. Hale. This is your property now, and right for a man to sleep under the same roof with women not his kin," he replied. "My ma taught me better than that." A ghost of a smile touched Amelia's face. "Your mother raised a gentleman then." The shed was cold, but sound, with only a few spots where snow had drifted through cracks in the walls. Lucas wrapped himself in his bedroll, listening to the wind whistle through the trees. The situation wasn't ideal, but he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision to let them stay. Not yet, anyway. Morning came with pale light filtering through the smoke hole in the cabin's roof. Lucas had already been up for an hour, checking his horse and assessing what repairs the outbuildings needed. When he returned to the cabin, he found Amelia already awake, pouring coffee into tin cups. "We'll need to be clear about arrangements," she said without preamble, handing him a steaming cup. "If we're to stay." Lucas took a careful sip of the strong brew. Meaning we won't live on charity." Her voice was firm. "We can workmen fences, chop wood, cook meals. I can keep proper books for your ranch operations." She met his gaze steadily. "Let us earn our place here, at least until spring." The other women were stirring now, rolling up their blankets and straightening their simple dresses. Lucas watched them for a moment, noting how they moved around each other with the ease of long familiarity. They were a family in their own right, bound by loss and determination. "Fence needs mending up by the north pasture," he said finally. "And that wood pile won't cut itself." He paused, considering. "You know anything about cattle? We can learn." Amelia replied quickly, "We're not afraid of hard work." Lucas nodded slowly. "Spring's a long way off. Won't be easy. We've done hard before, Mr. Hale." There was quiet pride in her voice. "And we'll do it again." The morning sun had broken through the clouds when they all filed out of the cabin. Lucas showed them where the tools were stored: axes for wood cutting, shovels for clearing paths. Through the snow, the youngest woman proved surprisingly strong with an axe. While the sisters worked together to clear the snow away from the cabin's foundation, Amelia stuck close to Lucas as he examined the cabin's exterior, noting repairs needed before the next storm. She asked intelligent questions about the ranch operations. clearly already thinking about how they could make themselves useful. "Reckon we can make this work," Lucas said finally, watching the women work. There was something both awkward and right about their presence, like a piece of furniture that didn't quite fit, but somehow made a room feel more like home. "We won't let you down," Amelia promised, softly. They worked through the morning, the sound of axes and shovels mixing with occasional quiet conversation. It wasn't quite comfortable yet. They were still strangers thrown together by circumstance. But there was a tentative sense of purpose emerging. A fragile foundation of something that might, with time and care, grow into family. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they cleared paths between the cabin and outbuildings. Lucas found himself automatically adjusting his long stride to match Amelia's shorter steps as they discussed what supplies would be needed from town. The other women slowly grew less tense in his presence, though conversation remained careful and polite. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. As the morning wore on, the awkward edges of their situation began to soften, worn smooth by shared work and common purpose. They were no longer just 5 desperate women and a lonely rancher. They were people finding their way towards something new. Something that might just save them all. The days settled into a comfortable rhythm at the cabin. Morning frost painted delicate patterns on the windows while smoke curled from the chimney into the crisp mountain air. Lucas found himself adapting to the presence of the women, their quiet industry filling the once empty spaces with purpose. "Plant your feet wider," Lucas instructed, watching as the youngest of the women, Mary Beth, struggled with a heavy post-hole digger. "Let the weight of the tool do the work." She adjusted her stance, and the metal bit deeper into the frozen earth beside the corral. "Like this?" she asked, determination creasing her brow. "Better?" he nodded. "Though mind you don't strain yourself." From the corner of his eye, he saw Amelia watching from the cabin door, a slight smile on her face. She'd taken charge of the household duties with quiet efficiency, establishing cooking rotations and keeping careful inventory of their supplies. The pantry shelves, once bare, now held neat rows of preserved goods the women had brought with them. The evening meal had become a time of gathering, the rough-hewn table witness to more warmth than Lucas had known since Sarah's passing. Tonight, Rebecca, the middle sister, had managed to make cornbread with their dwindling stores of meal, and the simple addition brought smiles all around. "Reckon I'll need to make a supply run soon," Lucas mentioned, breaking off a piece of the bread, running low on coffee and flour. "I've made a list," Amelia replied, passing him a carefully written inventory. Her neat handwriting reminded him of his schoolteacher. Mother's precise and measured. "Though you should know there's talk in town about us," Lucas grunted. He'd expected as much. "What kind of talk?" "Oh, the usual sort," Sarah Jane, the second eldest, said with a bitter edge. Wondering what kind of arrangement the giant rancher has with 5 women living in his cabin. "Let them talk," Lucas said firmly. "Ain't their business to understand." The women exchanged glances, appreciation mixing with worry in their eyes. They'd faced judgment before. Lucas knew when they'd tried to claim their husbands' wages. When they'd sought work in town, the world had little patience for women alone. The peaceful routine they'd established shattered 3 days later. Lucas was mending tack in the shed when he heard hoofbeats approaching. A rider appeared through the trees, his citified clothes and polished boots marking him as no local rancher. "This, the Hale property," the man called out, reining his horse to a stop. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Lucas set aside the leather he was working. "It is, and you are." "Carter." "Railroad Land Office." The man dismounted with practiced ease, pulling papers from his saddlebag. "Got some matters to discuss regarding this parcel." Lucas's stomach tightened. He'd heard stories of the railroads. Aggressive land acquisition tactics, but hadn't thought they'd reach this far into the high country. Inside then, the weather's turning. Amelia looked up from her mending as they entered the cabin, her expression carefully neutral. The other women stilled their various tasks, watching with wary eyes. Carter's smile turned cold when he saw them. Well, now, this is interesting. The widows from the mining camp, if I'm not mistaken. He laid his papers on the table with deliberate precision. Actually makes my job a bit simpler. Having you all here. How so? Lucas asked, not liking the man's tone. These documents show that this land was originally staked by James Price, Thomas Weber, and the other miners who, he paused delicately, met with misfortune in the collapse. Their claims were never properly registered with the Territory Office. The railroad subsequently purchased the rights from the original land office grant. Amelia stood slowly, her face pale. That's not possible. Our husbands filed their claims properly. I saw the papers myself. Did you now? Carter's voice dripped. False sympathy. And where are those papers now, Mrs. Price? Lost in the collapse, she whispered, along with everything else. Lucas studied the documents spread across the table, anger building in his chest. The legal language was complex, but the intent was clear enough. These papers were genuine. Neither his recent purchase nor the women's prior claim would stand. Convenient timing, he said, roughly. These papers showing up now after the auction. Carter shrugged. The railroad's survey crews have been working through these sections systematically. Your recent purchase simply brought this parcel to our attention sooner rather than later. The youngest of the women had begun to cry softly, while the others huddled together near the stove. Lucas could feel their fear. They'd already lost so much, and now even this temporary refuge was threatened. How long? Lucas demanded. I'll be back in 1 week with proper enforcement. Carter replied, gathering his papers. I suggest you use that time to make arrangements. He glanced at the women with barely concealed disdain. All of you. After Carter rode away, silence filled the cabin like smoke. The women's faces showed the same shocked disbelief Lucas had seen after the mine. Collapsed the look of people watching their world crumble yet again. He's lying, Sarah Jane burst out suddenly. He has to be. James and Thomas weren't fools. They filed everything proper and legal. Doesn't matter if he's lying if we can't prove it, Rebecca said bitterly. We've no papers to show otherwise. Lucas watched as Amelia sank into a chair, her usual composure cracking. I should have kept copies, she whispered. Should have stored them somewhere safe. This ain't your fault, Lucas said firmly. He moved to stoke the fire, needing to do something with his hands. Railroad's been pulling these tricks all over the territory. They count on folks not having the means to fight back. What can we do? Mary Beth asked, her young face streaked with tears. Where will we go? Lucas straightened to his full height, decision crystallizing. You'll stay right here, he said. All of you. Until we sort this out proper. Mr. Hale. Amelia began. We can't ask you to. Ain't asking, he cut her off. Something ain't right about those papers, and I aim to find out what. He looked around at their faces, seeing hope struggle against fear. We've got a week. Reckon that's time enough to start turning over some stones. The women huddled closer, together, drawing strength from each other as they always had. Lucas watched them, thinking of Sarah and how she would have handled this situation. She'd always said a man's measure showed clearest when standing between trouble and those who needed protection. Thank you, Amelia said softly, her eyes meeting his, for not giving up on us. Lucas nodded, unable to find words for the protective fury building in his chest. He'd bought this land fair and square, and these women had suffered enough loss. Railroad agent or no, he wasn't about to let them face another winter homeless. The cabin grew quiet as evening deepened, but it wasn't their usual comfortable silence. Fear hung in the air like winter frost, and the women's soft weeping continued. well into the night. Lucas lay awake in the shed, listening to the wind and planning his next moves. Come morning, he'd ride to town and start asking questions. Someone would know the truth about those claims, and he intended to find them before Carter returned with his men. The railroad might have money and power on their side, but Lucas had something better a reason to fight that went beyond mere property. He had people depending on him now, and he aimed to prove worthy of that trust. The morning sun cast long shadows across the frozen ground as Lucas helped Amelia into the wagon. Frost sparkled on the wooden seat boards, and their breath came out in white puffs in the bitter air. He'd wrapped extra blankets around the seat, knowing the journey to town would take the better part of the morning. "The others will manage fine," Amelia said, noting his glance back toward the cabin where smoke curled from the chimney. "Sarah Jane knows how to keep everyone busy." Lucas nodded, clicking to the horses. The wagon wheels groaned as they started. Down the rutted trail, ice crackling beneath the iron rims. He'd chosen their sturdiest wagon, but the frozen ground made for slow going. "Might not find anything in town," he said after a while, feeling he should prepare her. Amelia pulled her shawl tighter. "We have to try." Those papers Carter showed us something wasn't right about them. James was always careful with his claims. They rode in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, the horses' hooves making a steady rhythm on the hard ground. Lucas found himself appreciating Amelia's quiet strength, so different from the hysteria many might show in such circumstances. She reminded him of his late wife Sarah in that way, facing troubles with dignity instead of drama. The town came into view near midday, smoke rising from chimneys and the telegraph office's wire humming in the cold air. Lucas helped Amelia down from the wagon, conscious of the stares from townspeople going about their business. A woman whispered behind her hand to her companion as they passed. The county clerk's office occupied a cramped corner of the courthouse, smelling of dust and old paper. Mr. Peterson, the clerk, peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles as they entered. "Mr. Hale," he said, surprised. "Don't often see you in town." His eyes flickered to Amelia, curiosity evident. "Need to check some land records," Lucas said. "Mining claims from about 2 years back, up in Thunder Canyon." Peterson's eyebrows rose. "The Price Faber claims. Had someone else in asking about those just last week." He shuffled through a stack of leather-bound books. "Strange business. That strange how?" Amelia asked, stepping forward. The clerk pulled out 2 different ledgers, laying them side by side. "Well, see here. Got 2 different sets of filings. Original claims by James Price and the others, all proper and legal far as I can tell. Then these other papers showed up recent, saying the claims were sold to the railroad last year." He adjusted his spectacles. "Thing is, I don't rightly recall processing that sale myself." Lucas and Amelia exchanged glances. "Those men died in the mine collapse," she said quietly. "They couldn't have sold anything last year." Peterson nodded. Slowly, thought that might be the case. Papers looked official enough, but he trailed off, then lowered his voice. "Railroad's been mighty aggressive about buying up land lately. Heard tales of some peculiar dealings in other counties." Lucas studied the documents, anger building. "In his chest, you keep copies of all this?" "Have to, by law," Peterson replied. "Though funny thing, someone spilled ink all over the original claim numbers last month. Pure accident, they said." They left the courthouse with more questions than answers, but Lucas's suspicions were growing stronger. The railroad's claim stank of fraud, but proving it would be another matter entirely. "Need to stop at the store," he said, helping Amelia back into the wagon. Running low on supplies. Inside Miller's general store, they endured more curious stares as they gathered. Necessities, coffee, flour, salt. Lucas could hear the whispers. Living together, unmarried, 5 women in that cabin. Ain't proper. Amelia held her head high, though her cheeks flushed. As they waited for their purchases to be wrapped, the Reverend Matthews entered, stamping snow from his boots. Mrs. Price, Mr. Hale, he greeted them warmly. Good to see you both. How are the other ladies faring? As well as can be expected, Amelia replied carefully. The Reverend's kind eyes showed understanding. I've been praying for your household. These are difficult times, but the Lord often works in unexpected ways. He touched Amelia's shoulder gently. Remember, our church doors are always open to all of you. Much obliged, Reverend Lucas said gruffly, touched by the man's acceptance when so many others judged. The sky was darkening by the time they started home, Lucas lighting the wagon's lantern against the gathering gloom. Snow had begun falling. Again, soft flakes catching in Amelia's dark hair. What Peterson said about those papers, she mused, it fits with what James always told me. He was so careful about filing everything properly, knowing how valuable those claims might be. Lucas guided the horses carefully along the icy trail. Railroads counting on no one being able to prove different. But there might be records somewhere, copies of the original claims, maybe? The cabin windows glowed with welcoming light. When they finally arrived, the other women rushing out to help carry in supplies and hear their news. Lucas built up the fire while Amelia explained what they'd learned at the courthouse. So, there's hope. Mary Beth asked, her young face eager. If we can find proof of the original claims, Lucas said. Something showing the numbers, dates, boundaries. Amelia's expression suddenly changed. James's trunk, she said softly. Under our bed in the cabin. He kept all his important papers there. Said to never let anyone else touch them. The women helped her drag out the battered trunk, its leather straps cracked with age. Inside lay the remnants of a life-cut short work shirt, a good Sunday coat, a worn Bible. Amelia lifted the Bible with trembling hands. He always marked important things in here, she explained, carefully turning the pages. A brittle paper fell out, yellow with age, but still legible. Lucas picked it up, holding it close to the lamp. It's a claim number, he said, hope rising, in his chest, and coordinates matching what Peterson showed us. He looked at Amelia, seeing the same cautious optimism in her eyes. This could help prove the railroad's papers are false. The women gathered closer, their earlier despair giving way to renewed determination. The old trunk had yielded up its secret, a thin thread of hope to hold on to. Lucas watched them supporting each other, sharing strength as they always did, and knew he'd fight with everything he had to help them keep their home. We'll need more, he said honestly. But it's a start. Shows your husband's filed proper, just like you said. Amelia carefully wrapped the paper in a clean handkerchief. James always said truth would out in the end. Reckon he was right about that too. The cabin grew quiet as the women prepared for bed. But it was a different kind of quiet than the fearful silence of the night before. Lucas banked the fire, thinking about the battles ahead. The railroad had money and power on their side, but sometimes justice came down to simple things. A paper preserved in a Bible, a clerk's careful records, and people willing to stand. Together against bullies. Outside in the shed, he could hear the wind rising, promising more snow by morning. But for the first time since Carter's visit, he felt real hope. They had something to fight with now. And fight they would. The snow began falling in thick curtains just before dawn. The kind of heavy winter storm that could trap folks indoors for days. Lucas stood at the cabin window, watching the white wall descend while the women stirred from their blankets near the hearth. The mountain wind howled fierce enough to rattle the window panes, making everyone grateful for sturdy walls and a good supply of firewood. Reckon we'll all be staying put for a spell, Lucas said, turning from the window. Might as well make the time useful. Amelia was already stoking the cook stove, her movements sure and practiced. "We've got flour enough for biscuits," she said, "and that venison stew from yesterday could stretch another day." The younger women, Mary Beth and Sarah, gathered around the table while their sisters Rebecca and Hannah helped with breakfast preparations. Lucas dragged his worn leather tool roll from beneath his bunk in the corner, spreading it out on the table. "Figure it's time you ladies learned something about leatherwork," he said, pulling out his awl and waxed thread. "Plenty of tack. Needs mending, and extra hands make lighter work." The morning passed peacefully as Lucas demonstrated how to punch neat holes and make strong stitches in the worn leather. The women proved quick studies, their nimble fingers soon working steadily at bridles and straps while the storm raged outside. The cabin filled with the comfortable sense of leather and wood smoke, mingling with the promising aroma of biscuits, browning in the oven. "Mama always said idle hands were the devil's workshop," Mary Beth commented, carefully working her needle through a stubborn piece of harness. "Though I don't reckon she ever thought I'd be learning to mend tack," Kua found himself chuckling at her determined expression. "Your mama probably never thought you'd be living with a giant rancher neither," he said, surprising himself with the easy joke. The women's laughter filled the cabin, warm and genuine. It struck Lucas then how long it had been since he'd heard such sounds in his daily life or made them himself. Since losing Sarah and their unborn child, his world had grown quiet and cold. But now, as afternoon deepened into evening, Sarah and Hannah began singing hymns while they worked. Their sweet voices lifted amazing grace into the rafters, joined soon by their sisters. Lucas glanced up to see Amelia settling into the rocking chair with her Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. "Would you like to hear some scripture?" she asked, looking around at them all. At their eager nods, she began reading from the book of Ruth, her clear voice carrying over the storm's muffled roar. Lucas found himself drawn into the ancient story of loyalty and chosen family, his hands working automatically at his leather. Repairs while he listened. The words seemed to hold special meaning now, speaking of strangers becoming kin through love and duty. A heavy pounding at the door startled them all from their peaceful scene. Lucas rose quickly, motioning the women to stay seated as he opened it to find Ed Thompson, a neighboring rancher, standing in the swirling snow. "Evening, Ed," Lucas said calmly, though he noted the man's sneering expression. Hale Thompson spat, stomping snow from his boots. "Thought you ought to know what folks are saying in town about this arrangement of yours." His eyes raked disapprovingly over the domestic scene behind Lucas. "Come in out of the cold," Lucas replied steadily. "Coffee's hot if you've a mind for it." Thompson's scowl deepened at this peaceful response, clearly having expected, perhaps even hoped for, a more violent reaction. "You're ruining your reputation, Hale. Living here with 5 women, unmarried, ain't proper, ain't Christian." Lucas felt his temper spark, but kept his voice level as he poured coffee into a tin cup. "Reckon there's different ways of being Christian. Ed seems to me taking care of widows and orphans is mentioned somewhere in that good book." Amelia had quietly closed her Bible, but her chin was high as she regarded their unwelcome visitor. The other women continued their work, though their hands moved more slowly now, watching. "Here's your coffee," Lucas said, extending the cup. "You're welcome to join us while the storm blows over. We're just doing some mending, reading some scripture." Thompson's face worked through several expressions: confusion, anger, uncertainty. Finally, he took the coffee but remained standing. "You always were a peculiar one, Hale. But this," he shook his head. "Don't say I didn't warn you." After Thompson had gone, stamping back out into the storm, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. Lucas stood at the window, watching until the man's shape disappeared into the whirling white. "Thank you," Amelia said softly, coming to stand beside him. "For defending our dignity that way. Couldn't have been easy, hearing those accusations." Lucas turned to face her, struck again by the quiet strength in her bearing. "Truth's truth," he said simply. "Ain't nothing improper about decent folks helping each other survive." The peaceful mood slowly returned as they settled back to their tasks, though Lucas noticed the women singing more softly now, as if not wanting to draw attention from any other possible visitors. But their renewed peace proved short-lived. Just as they were clearing away the evening meal, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats cut through the storm's howl. Lucas's hand instinctively went to his rifle before he caught himself, forcing it to relax. A different messenger from the railroad. Company stood in the doorway this time, snow crusting his coat. His message was blunt. Back taxes were supposedly owed on the property, dating from before the mine collapse. If not paid within the month, the sheriff would be forced to remove. All occupants. Lucas watched the fear spread across the women's faces as they heard this new threat. Mary Beth began to cry quietly while Hannah wrapped an arm around her shoulders. But it was Amelia's expression that caught at his heart, determined despite the worry in her eyes. "We'll figure this out," Lucas said firmly, looking at each of them in turn. "You ain't alone in this fight anymore." He turned back to the messenger. "Tell your railroad bosses we'll be looking into these supposed taxes, and tell them this household stands together." After the messenger departed, Lucas built up the fire while the women huddled close, seeking comfort in each other's presence. The storm still raged outside, but it seemed less threatening than the storm of troubles gathering around them. "We should pray," Amelia said quietly. And they all bowed their heads while she asked for strength and guidance, looking at them in the firelight. Lucas realized something important had shifted in his heart. These weren't just women he was helping out of duty anymore. Somehow, through shared meals and work and songs, through standing together against outside judgment, they had become something more. They had become family. The snow continued falling outside. But inside the cabin, warmth and determination held firm against the cold. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm finally broke after 3 days, leaving behind a crystalline morning that sparkled like diamonds scattered across the snow. Lucas stood on the cabin's porch, watching his breath cloud in the crisp air while dawn painted the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds. "Beautiful morning for work," Amelia said. Stepping out beside him, she pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. "The creek should be running clear now." Lucas nodded, studying the glinting ice along the trees. "Reckon we'd best get started early. Lots needs doing while the weather holds." They gathered the others after a quick breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee. Lucas laid out the day's tasks, impressed by how naturally Amelia organized her sisters, directing them with quiet efficiency. Mary Beth and Sarah would help haul water from the creek, while Hannah and Rebecca would assist Lucas with wood splitting. "We'll need enough cordwood to last through any more storms," Lucas explained, showing Hannah how to properly stack the split logs against the cabin's wall. "Build it tight, mind the gaps. Rebecca proved surprisingly strong with an axe, her determined swings precise despite her small frame. "Papa taught us not to be afraid of hard work," she said, wiping sweat from her brow despite the cold. "Said it was the only thing between folks and starvation out here." Lucas nodded, remembering similar lessons from his own father. He glanced over to where Amelia led the water-hauling team, noting how she showed the younger ones to test the ice before stepping onto it, how to balance the heavy buckets for the long walk back. Her quiet competence stirred something in him, respect, admiration, and perhaps something more that he wasn't ready to name. By midday, they had established a smooth rhythm. The wood pile grew steadily while the water barrels filled. Lucas retrieved a deer he'd shot the previous week, showing the women how to properly cut and prepare the meat for smoking. The salt barrels running low, Amelia observed as they worked, her capable hands steady with the knife. "We'll need to be careful with what's left." "Thought of that," Lucas replied. "Found some wild garlic last fall. Dried it in the shed." Different flavor, but it'll help preserve the meat just fine. They worked through the afternoon, the women taking turns tending the smokehouse while others continued with wood and water. Lucas found himself repeatedly impressed by their willingness to learn, their determination to master each new task. They were far from the helpless females some might have expected. As evening approached, the rich scent of smoking venison filled the air. Lucas watched Amelia direct the preparation of a hearty stew, her quiet authority keeping everything running smoothly. The cabin felt different now, more like a true home than just shelter. Over supper, Lucas cleared his throat. "Been thinking," he said, looking around the table. "Might be good to have a proper Sunday service tomorrow, here in the cabin, if you're willing." The women's faces lit up at the suggestion. "Oh, yes," Sarah exclaimed. "We haven't had a proper service since before the mine accident." "We could arrange a little altar," Hannah suggested. "I've got Mama's lace tablecloth saved in my trunk." Amelia's eyes met Lucas's across the table, warm with approval. "It would be good to worship together," she said softly. "As a household, a day." Spent the evening preparing. Hannah's carefully preserved tablecloth transformed a small table into an altar. Rebecca contributed her mother's brass candlesticks, while Mary Beth arranged pine boughs in an old crock. Lucas watched their excitement, feeling something long dormant stirring in his heart. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Pale sunlight filtered through the cabin's cracks, catching dust motes like tiny stars. The women had dressed in their best, though the dresses were worn and carefully mended. Lucas had donned his one good shirt, feeling somewhat self-conscious as they gathered. Amelia opened her Bible, its pages soft with use. The women's voices rose in amazing grace, sweet and clear in the morning quiet. Lucas found himself joining in, his deep bass complementing their higher tones. The hymn filled the cabin with something more than just music, hope, perhaps, or healing. As Amelia read from the Psalms, Lucas watched the sunlight play across her face. He remembered other Sundays, long ago, when faith had come easily. Before, Sarah's death had frozen something inside him, but here now, surrounded by these brave women's voices, he felt that ice beginning to thaw. After the service, Lucas remained standing. "Got something else to say?" he began, his voice gruff with emotion. "Been thinking hard about our situation here. Seems to me we're stronger together than apart." He looked at each face in turn, settling finally on Amelia's. "Propose we make it official, form a proper partnership. Pool our labor and resources, work this place as one household. Equal shares in whatever comes." Silence fell as his words sank in. Then Mary Beth burst into tears, happy ones, judging by her smile. Sarah and Hannah hugged each other, while Rebecca beamed. But it was Amelia's reaction Lucas watched most closely. She stood slowly, her eyes bright. "You're offering us more." "Then partnership," she said quietly. "You're offering us family." Lucas nodded, something catching in his throat. "Reckon that's exactly what I'm offering." The cabin filled with joy, laughter, tears, and excited chatter as they discussed plans for the future. Lucas found himself smiling more than he had in years, watching these women who had somehow worked their way past his defenses, but their celebration proved short-lived. As darkness fell, Hannah's scream from the porch shattered their peace. Fire. The corral's burning. They rushed outside into the bitter cold. Orange flames lit the night sky, casting hellish shadows across the snow. The corral posts blazed like torches, while scattered hay burned in bright patches. Lucas charged toward the flames, shouting orders. "Get the horses clear. Form a bucket line from the water barrels." The women moved with surprising efficiency, passing buckets while Lucas and Amelia worked to free the panicked horses. Smoke stung their eyes as they fought the fire, but determination drove them on. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they reduced the flames to smoldering embers. In the aftermath, they surveyed the destruction. Half the corral was gone, the posts nothing but charred stumps, scattered around the edges. They found clear evidence of deliberate sabotage, oil-soaked rags, and multiple points where the fire had been set. "Railroadmen," Amelia said grimly, holding up a torn piece of paper bearing the company's letterhead. "They're trying to drive us out." Lucas stood in the smoking ruins, his face hard with anger. The women clustered together, their earlier joy replaced by fear and determination. Their moment of spiritual peace had been shattered by this act of violence, but looking at their resolute faces, Lucas knew they wouldn't be broken by it. The night wind carried the scent of smoke across the snow, while overhead, stars glittered coldly in the vast Montana sky. They had found something precious today: family, faith, belonging. Now they would have to fight to keep it. The night grew bitter with more than just cold. Smoke stung their eyes as they worked frantically to contain the flames. Lucas directed their efforts, his voice carrying over the crackle of fire and frightened cattle. "Keep those buckets moving," he shouted, leading a horse to safety. "Sarah." Rebecca wet down those blankets and beat out the smaller flames. The women formed an efficient line from water barrel to corral, passing heavy buckets hand to hand. Their skirts grew sodden, and ice formed in their hair, but determination drove them onward. Mary Beth stumbled once, sloshing water across Hannah's boots, but Amelia steadied her with gentle hands. "Keep going," Amelia encouraged, her voice firm despite her chattering teeth. "We're making progress." Through the chaos, movement caught Lucas's eye, shadowy figures darting between trees at the edge of the firelight. His massive frame tensed as he spotted 3 men trying to scatter the remaining cattle. "Keep working here," he ordered the women, then charged toward the raiders. The first man went down easily, surprised by Lucas's speed, despite his size. The second swung a fence post, catching Lucas across the shoulder. Pain flared, but Lucas managed to knock the man off his feet. The third raider landed a solid punch to Lucas's jaw before fleeing into the darkness. By the time false dawn began painting the sky in watery grays, they had the fire under control. Smoke rose in thin tendrils from blackened posts, while puddles froze into treacherous patches across the trampled snow. The cattle, those they'd managed to save, huddled together in a corner of the remaining corral section. Lucas stood swaying slightly, his shirt torn and face bruised. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye where the fence post had caught him. The women gathered around him, faces etched with concern. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his voice was rough with smoke and exhaustion. "Just need to check the rest of the property." "You need tending first," Amelia countered firmly. She turned to the others. "Mary Beth, fetch my herb box. Hannah, clean cloths and water. Sarah, stoke up the fire. We're all half frozen." Lucas tried to protest, but found himself guided to a chair near the hearth. The women moved with quiet efficiency, heating water and preparing poultices. Rebecca appeared with a cup of willow bark tea, while Amelia began cleaning his wounds with gentle hands. "Hold still," she murmured, dabbing at the cut above his eye. "This needs stitching." Lucas grimaced but remained motionless as she worked. The other women hovered nearby, passing supplies and offering worried comments about the raiders. "We should send for the sheriff," Hannah suggested, wringing her hands. "And say what?" Sarah asked bitterly. "We didn't see their faces clear enough to prove anything." "Violence isn't the answer," Amelia said quietly, focusing on her neat stitches. "That's what they want, an excuse to claim we're dangerous, uncontrollable. We must respond with dignity and resolve." Lucas's hands clenched into fists. They could have killed someone tonight, burning a man's corral, scattering his stock. That's not just mischief, that's deliberate destruction. I know. Amelia's voice remained calm as she tied off the last stitch. But if we retaliate, we become what they claim we are. Our strength lies in our unity, in rebuilding what they destroy. The others nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in her words. Lucas relaxed slightly under her ministrations, though anger still simmered in his eyes. As true dawn finally broke, they surveyed the damage in clear light. Half the corral lay in ruins, posts charred or broken. Scattered hay smoldered in the snow, and hoofprints showed where cattle had fled into the woods. We'll need to round up the strays, Lucas said, pushing aside his weariness, and rebuild before another storm hits. First, you rest, Amelia insisted. The girls and I can start clearing debris and salvaging what posts we can. Lucas looked ready to argue, but exhaustion won out. He slept for several hours while the women began the cleanup, waking to find them already organizing lumber and tools for rebuilding. The next days fell into a pattern of hard work and careful watching. They rebuilt the corral section by section, hammering posts into the frozen ground until their fingers went numb. The younger women tried to keep spirits up, sharing jokes as they worked. "My lands, Lucas," Rebecca teased as he drove another post home with powerful strokes. "Reckon you could drive those stakes with just your bare hands if you had to." "Rather use the mallet," he replied with a slight smile. "Less splinters that way." Sarah and Hannah competed to see who could carry the most rails, while Mary Beth proved surprisingly skilled at calculating angles for the bracing. Through it all, Amelia moved quietly among them, offering encouragement and direction where needed. During a break on the third day, she brought Lucas coffee, standing beside him as they watched the others work. "Thank you," she said softly. "Standing strong with us. Not many men would have." Lucas studied her profile, noting the determination in her jaw, the quiet grace in her bearing. "You've all proved stronger than most men I know," he replied. "Standing with you seems natural now." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the rhythmic sound of hammering as the others resumed work. Yet beneath their industry, worry lingered. The railroad's escalating tactics spoke of desperation or determination, and the tax deadline drew ever closer, a shadow on their hard-won peace. But for now, they worked together, rebuilding what had been destroyed. Each post-driven home, each rail secured, became a statement of defiance and hope. They were no longer just survivors sharing space, but a family standing united against whatever came next. The sun began setting behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Lucas watched the women making their way back to the cabin. There, shadows long across the new-built corral. Despite his healing bruises, despite the railroad's threats, he felt a deep certainty. Together, they would find a way forward. The wagon creaked and swayed as Lucas guided the horses down the snow-packed trail toward town. Beside him, Amelia sat wrapped in a thick wool shawl, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. The journey felt different from their last rushed visit. There was purpose in their mission now, seeking allies against the railroad's threats. "Mind the ice here," Lucas warned, steering around a treacherous patch. His massive hands held the reins with surprising gentleness. "Trails worse than last week." Amelia nodded, gripping the seat as they navigated the rough section. "The thaw and freeze makes it tricky. But we need it to come. We can't face this alone anymore." The church bell tolled 9 times as they rolled into town, its clear notes carrying across the frozen street. Few people were out in the bitter cold, but those who were stopped to stare at the odd pair, the giant rancher and the miner's widow. Riding together in broad daylight, Lucas helped Amelia down from the wagon, his large hands spanning her waist. Easily they made their way first to the white-painted church, where Reverend Matthews was sweeping snow from the steps. "Bless my soul," the preacher said warmly, leaning his broom against the rail. Come in, come in. It's too cold to talk. Outside. Inside the church, light filtered through frosted windows, casting rainbow patterns on the wooden pews. The Reverend listened intently as they explained their situation, the disputed claim, the threats, the burning of the corral. This cannot stand, Reverend Matthews said firmly, his weathered face grave. The railroad may have money and muscle, but they don't have right on their side. I'll speak on your behalf this Sunday. Make it clear where Christian charity should lie. We're grateful, Amelia said softly. Some folks think poorly of our arrangement, but we're trying to survive with dignity. The Lord sees the heart, the preacher replied, patting her hand. And I see a family forming, different though it may be. You have my support. Their next stop was the general store where they needed supplies. But to reach it, they had to pass the saloon. Even this early rough voices spilled out into the street along with the smell of stale whiskey. Well, look who's come to town, a voice called out as they passed. The giant and his harem. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he kept walking, one hand hovering protectively near Amelia's elbow. More jeers followed from the cowhands lounging against the saloon's front posts. Ain't proper. Keeping all them women to yourself. Maybe we should. Pay your cabin a visit. Share the wealth. Lucas's steps faltered, his massive frame tensing, but Amelia's quiet voice reached him. They're not worth the trouble. We have work to do. Inside the store, they focused on their list of necessities. Flour, coffee, salt, but Amelia had additional items in mind. We'll need these, she said firmly, placing 6 hymnals on the counter. When Lucas raised an eyebrow, she added, and seed for a kitchen garden. Spring will come eventually. Storekeeper's wife smiled approval, while her husband wrapped their purchases in brown paper. Lucas paid without comment. But his eyes held a glimmer of admiration for Amelia's forward-thinking optimism. The ride home was quieter, both lost in thought as the wagon wound through stands of bare-branched aspen. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow, and their breath frosted in the cooling air. I had dreams for that cabin, you know, Lucas said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Before I lost Martha. He paused, the old grief catching in his throat. Wanted to build up the ranch, fill the place with children. Here laughing in the yard, singing in the kitchen. Seems foolish now, maybe? Amelia was quiet for a long moment, watching the snow-covered landscape pass. Not foolish, she said finally. We all need dreams to hold on to. After Thomas died in the mine, I thought my hopes died too. All I wanted was a secure home, somewhere. To belong, somewhere to plant flowers and watch them grow. Lucas glanced at her, noting the quiet strength in her profile. Maybe some dreams change shape, but don't really die. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Warm lamplight spilled from the windows, and delicious smells wafted out when they opened the door. Surprise, the younger women called out. The rough-hewn table was set with their best plates, a golden cornbread centerpiece still steaming from the oven. We wanted to thank you, Hannah explained, taking their coats. For protecting us, for being strong when we needed it. Mary Beth. Made pie, Sarah added proudly. And Rebecca found some dried apples to go in it. Lucas stood speechless, his massive frame filling the doorway as he took in the simple feast and the beaming faces. Amelia gently pushed him toward his chair at the head of the table. Sit, she said softly. Let us do this for you. The evening passed in a warm glow of fellowship. They shared the meal, savoring every bite of the carefully prepared food. Afterward, Lucas showed them how to use the new hymnals, his deep voice joining their sweet ones in familiar tunes. Laughter mixed with the singing, and the cabin felt more like home than it had in years. Amazing Grace How sweet the sound! They sang together, the harmony rising to the rafters. That saved a wretch like me. One by one, the younger women drifted off to sleep, curled in their blankets by the hearth. Lucas took his usual place in the shed, while Amelia checked the locks one final time before retiring. The peace lasted only a few hours. In the darkest part of night, just before dawn, Lucas jerked awake at the sound of approaching horses. Many horses. He pulled on his boots quickly, grabbing his coat as he stepped out into the frigid night. Torchlight flickered through the trees, and hard voices carried on the still air. "Hail!" A familiar voice called out, "Railroad Agent Carter." "Time's up. We're taking possession now." Lucas counted at least 8 mounted men in the shadows beyond the cabin's light. Behind him, the door opened, and he heard Amelia's quiet footsteps in the snow. "Wake the others," he murmured without turning. "Bar the door." "You can't face them alone," she whispered back. "Bar the door," he repeated firmly. Then, louder, to the waiting men, "This is private property. You're not welcome here." Carter's laugh was ugly in the darkness. "Private property. We have papers that say different. Surrender the cabin now, or we'll take it by force." Lucas stood his ground, snow crunching under his boots as he braced himself. Behind him, the cabin door closed softly, and he heard the bar slide into place. Lucas stood like a mountain in the swirling snow, his broad shoulders squared against the torchlight. 3 men dismounted, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. The leader, Railroad Agent Carter, held a pistol loosely at his side. His companions carried heavy clubs, their intentions clear in the shadowed night. "Last chance, Hale," Carter drawled, torch flames reflecting in his cold eyes. "Clear out peaceful-like, or we do this the hard way." "You've got no legal right," Lucas rumbled, his voice steady despite the odds. "Those women have proper claim. Papers can be challenged." Carter stepped closer, firelight dancing across his weathered face. "And giants can fall." The first swing came fast, a club whistling through the darkness. Lucas blocked it with his forearm, the impact jarring his bones. He countered with a massive right hook that sent one attacker sprawling in the snow. But the other man circled behind, and pain exploded across Lucas's ribs as the second club found its mark through the cabin's frosted window. He glimpsed the women's frightened faces. The sight fueled his resolve. Lucas roared, charging forward like an enraged grizzly. His huge hands seized Carter's coat, lifting the smaller man clear off his feet. The agent's pistol discharged harmlessly into the night sky before spinning away into a snowbank. "You're making a mistake." Carter gasped as Lucas slammed him against a fence post. The other men recovered, attacking together. Club blows rained down on Lucas's back and shoulders. He released Carter to defend himself, managing to land several powerful punches that sent his attackers staggering. But they kept coming, and exhaustion began to slow his movements. A particularly vicious strike caught him in the ribs again, driving the breath from his lungs. Lucas stumbled, one knee hitting the snow. Through blurred vision, he saw Carter retrieve his pistol. "Enough." The agent's voice cut through the night. "We've made our point. Mount up, boys." As quickly as it began, the fight was over. Hoofbeats faded into the darkness, carrying Carter's final threat. "We'll be back with more men, Hale. Count on it." Lucas tried to stand, but found he couldn't. His entire body throbbed, each breath sending sharp pains through his chest. The cabin door flew open, spilling warm lamplight across the bloodied snow. "Lucas," Amelia's voice seemed to come from far away. Small hands gripped his shoulders, the women trying to help him up. Inside, he managed to grunt, "Not safe out here." Together, they half-carried his massive frame through the door. The youngest, Mary Beth, was crying openly. Sarah and Rebecca cleared the table while Hannah stoked the fire higher. Amelia took charge, her usual composure masking her fear. "Get my sewing basket. There are clean rags inside," she ordered, "and the whiskey from the top shelf." They eased Lucas onto the bed in the corner, the one the women had insisted he'd take after the first week, rather than sleeping in the cold shed. His coat came off with difficulty, revealing dark bruises already forming across his ribs and back. "Sorry," he whispered, as Amelia began cleaning his wounds with whiskey-soaked cloth. "Try to protect." "Hush now," she interrupted, her hands gentle but firm. "You've nothing to be sorry for." But Lucas shook his head, guilt heavy in his voice. "Not strong enough. Can't keep you safe. They'll come back with more. The Lord is our strength," Amelia said firmly. She set aside the bloody rags and knelt beside the bed. The other women gathered close as she bowed her head. "Dear Heavenly Father," she began, her clear voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "We come before you now, humble and afraid. But you are our rock and our fortress, our deliverer in whom we trust. We ask for your healing touch upon Lucas, who stood brave against evil men. Give us wisdom to face what comes, and courage to stand together as a family." "Amen," the others whispered. "Grant us protection through the night," Amelia continued, "and show us your path forward. Let your peace fill this cabin and every heart within it. In Jesus' name, amen." Something settled in the room, a calm that went beyond mere quiet. Lucas's labored breathing eased slightly, and the younger women's tears slowed. They worked together to make him comfortable, fixing willow bark tea for the pain and laying cool compresses on the worst bruises. Dawn came pale and cold. Lucas tried to rise, but Amelia firmly pushed him back. "You'll heal faster if you rest," she insisted. "We can manage the chores," and manage they did. For 2 days, the women shouldered every task that kept the ranch alive. Hannah and Sarah, who had learned the most about cattle from Lucas, took charge of feeding and checking the herd. Rebecca kept the fire stoked and the water buckets full, while Mary Beth helped Amelia tend to Lucas and prepare meals. They worked through exhaustion, determination shining in every face. When the younger ones faltered, Amelia's quiet strength urged them on. She moved between tasks with grace, changing Lucas's bandages, organizing the work, keeping watch for riders on the horizon. Lucas watched them from his sickbed. Humbled by their resilience, each woman he'd once thought of as burdens had become pillars of strength, holding up their fragile household while he healed. Especially Amelia, whose faith seemed to light the cabin even in its darkest hours. On the evening of the second day, she sat beside him with fresh bandages. "The bruising is better," she said softly, her cool fingers gentle on his ribs. "But you must give yourself time to heal properly." "Never meant to bring such trouble to your door," Lucas murmured. Amelia's hands stilled. "You've brought us hope." Lucas Hale and family. Those are worth any trouble. Her words settled into his heart, easing a pain deeper than any physical wound. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the cabin, warmth and faith held strong against the gathering storm. The fire crackled softly as Lucas eased himself into the wooden chair by the hearth. His ribs still ached, but each day brought a measure of healing. The cabin's warmth wrapped around him like a blanket, chasing away memories of that brutal night in the snow. Amelia sat in her usual spot, the worn family Bible open on her lap. Its leather cover caught the firelight as she read from the book of Psalms, her voice steady and clear. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear." The younger women worked as they listened, needles flashing in and out of fabric. Mary Beth patched a work shirt while Sarah and Rebecca darned socks. Hannah focused on mending one of Lucas's heavy coats, her small hands careful with the thick material, A sharp knock at the door made them all freeze. Lucas started to rise, but Amelia was quicker. "You're not fully healed," she said firmly, marking her place in the Bible. "Let me." She crossed to the door, skirts swishing against rough floorboards. "Who's there?" "Henry," came the response, calm and measured. "Scout from Fort Garland, bringing news." Amelia opened the door to reveal a tall man wrapped in a wool blanket against the cold. His dark eyes took in the scene, Lucas by the fire, the women with their sewing, the general air of wariness. "Much obliged for letting me in," Henry said. Removing his hat, snow dusted his shoulders as he stepped inside. "Been watching railroad men? Need to talk." Lucas gestured to an empty chair. "Welcome to join us." Henry moved with quiet grace, settling near the fire. He waited while Hannah poured him coffee in a tin cup, then spoke directly. "Railroad's been pushing folks off land all through the territory, using false papers, forged claims. Seen it before, you're certain?" Amelia asked, returning to her seat. Henry nodded. "Work as scout. See much, hear more. Agent Carter, bad reputation. Ex-bribes, threatened settlers. Many afraid to speak. Against company." "That explains the 2 sets of claim papers," Lucas said, leaning forward despite his protesting ribs. "The clerk showed us both filings." "Have proof?" Henry asked. Amelia set aside her Bible. "The mining papers from my husband's trunk. Would those help? Good start. Need more. Other settlers willing to testify now. Time is right." Henry sipped his coffee. No county judge in Denver. Honest man. Listen to evidence, not railroad money. Hope flickered across the women's faces. Mary Beth set down her sewing. "You mean we might not lose the cabin? We can prove the fraud?" Lucas mused. "But Denver's a hard journey, especially in winter." Henry's eyes were serious. "Can guide you. Shh, no safe trails. But railroad men watch roads. Journey not easy. We can't hide here forever," Amelia said quietly. She crossed to the trunk beneath her bed and drew out the brittle papers they'd found earlier. These showed the original claim stakes. "My husband marked everything carefully. He believed in doing things right." Lucas watched her handle the documents with reverent care. They represented more than property rights. They were a link to the life she'd lost, the future she still fought to secure. "When?" he asked Henry. "Week's end best. Storm coming, but clear after. Railroad men think you still healing. Good time. To move." He set down his empty cup. "Need all to testify. Women's words carry weight. Show family claim, not just business." The younger women exchanged glances. Sarah spoke first, her voice firm. "We'll go. We've faced worse than winter roads." "Indeed we have," Amelia agreed. She looked at Lucas. "If you're strong enough," he straightened in his chair, ignoring the twinge in his side. "Strong enough to see justice done." They spent the next hour planning. Henry drew a rough map on paper, marking the safest route to Denver. They would need the wagon, plenty of blankets, food for several days. The women began listing supplies while Lucas calculated feed for the horses. "Leave before dawn," Henry advised. "Travel light, travel quiet. I ride ahead, make sure path clear. Meet you at Miller's Creek Crossing." "We'll be ready," Amelia assured him. She walked him to the door when he rose to leave. "Thank you for bringing hope with your news." Henry paused in the doorway, snow swirling behind him. "Hope good. Justice better." He settled his hat back on his head. "Great Spirit, watch over this house." After he left, the women bustled about with renewed energy. Hannah and Rebecca began packing dried food into canvas bags. Sarah checked their warmest clothes while Mary Beth gathered medical supplies. None of them mentioned the possibility of further violence, but all prepared for it. Lucas watched Amelia return to her chair, the mining papers now resting atop her Bible. The firelight caught the silver threading through her dark hair, and he noticed the way her shoulders straightened with fresh determination. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she said softly, feeling his gaze. "When you first found us here, I never imagined that we'd end up defending this place together." Lucas finished. She smiled. "That we'd become family." Outside, snow began falling more heavily, thick flakes dancing in the gathering dusk. But inside the cabin, warmth and purpose filled every corner. The women's voices mingled as they worked, making lists and preparations. Their faith, tested by loss and hardship, burned bright as the hearth fire. Lucas felt strength flowing back into his muscles, driven by more than just physical healing. They had a chance now, a real chance, to keep their home and see justice done. Come week's end, they would face the winter trails together, carrying truth to light. The evening passed in purposeful activity. Amelia read more scripture as they worked, her voice steady and sure. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned." The familiar words settled over them like a blessing, stealing their hearts for the journey ahead. Dawn painted the sky in pale strokes as the wagon creaked into motion. Lucas held the reins steady, his breath visible in the crisp air. Beside him, Amelia sat wrapped in her thickest shawl, while the other women huddled under quilts in the wagon bed. The horses' hooves crunched through fresh snow as they made their way toward town. Lucas kept the pace careful and measured, mindful of the icy patches hidden beneath the white blanket. Every jolt of the wagon sent twinges through his healing ribs, but he kept his face neutral. By midday, they stopped in a sheltered grove to rest the horses. Amelia passed around cold biscuits while Lucas checked the harnesses. The women stretched, their stiff limbs, their faces pink from the cold. As dusk approached, the rattle of approaching horses broke the quiet. 6 riders emerged from the trees, blocking the narrow trail. Lucas recognized Carter's men by their railroad badges glinting in the fading light. Despite his protesting muscles, he rose to his full height. "You folks best turn back," one thug called out, hand resting on his pistol. Before Lucas could respond, Henry materialized from the shadows like a spirit. "These people travel under law," he said, his calm voice carrying authority. "Have papers, have rights." Amelia stood beside Lucas, clutching the documents. "We're bound for the county judge," she declared, "unless you mean to stop legal proceedings." The thugs shifted uneasily, eyeing Henry. His reputation as a scout carried weight, and none seemed eager to start trouble with him watching. After a tense moment, they backed their horses away. The church bells were ringing evening prayer when they finally reached town. The preacher welcomed them into the warm parsonage, offering hot stew and fresh bread. "Remember," he said, as they gathered to eat, "truth must not falter before mere might." That night, Lucas lay on his borrowed cot, every breath a reminder of his healing injuries. Sleep eluded him, but his resolve only grew stronger. Tomorrow, they would face the law, and he would stand firm. The courthouse buzzed with whispers as townsfolk packed the wooden benches. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Lucas sat straight despite his tender ribs, while Amelia smoothed her simple dress with steady hands. Railroad agent Carter strode to the front, his triumph gleaming in his eyes. He presented a stack of crisp papers to the judge. "These deeds clearly show the railroad's rightful ownership," he declared, voice dripping with confidence. Amelia rose then, her chin high. From her satchel she withdrew weathered documents, their edges soft from years of careful storage. "Your Honor, these are the original claim papers signed by my late husband and witnessed properly." Her voice rang clear through the hushed room. Lucas stepped forward next, his massive frame commanding attention. The railroad men came with threats, not truth, he stated quietly. They burned our corral and left me beaten when papers wouldn't persuade us. Henry moved like a shadow to the front. Many settlers tell same story, he explained, gesturing respectfully to the judge. Railroad men come with false papers, then bring trouble if people resist. Pattern clear as mountain stream. Murmurs swelled through the crowd. The preacher stood from his place near the back. I can speak to the character of these good people, he announced. Their household shows Christian charity and honest labor. Carter scoffed loudly, but the judge raised his hand for silence. Minutes stretched like hours as he examined both sets of documents. Finally, he looked up, his face stern. The original claims stand valid, he declared. Furthermore, Mr. Hale's partnership with these widows is hereby recognized as legal and binding. A collective sigh swept through the room. Carter's face darkened with rage as he snatched up his hat and stormed toward the door, boots echoing against the floorboards outside the courthouse. Sunshine glinted off fresh snow as townspeople gathered around Lucas and the women. Old Jim Turner, the blacksmith, clasped Lucas's hand. We had you wrong, friend. Mighty sorry for believing those railroad tales. Mrs. Peterson dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Those poor dears, all alone up there. We should have helped sooner. She pressed a basket of fresh eggs into Amelia's hands. The wagon ride home felt lighter than the journey in. Snow-laden pines lined the trail as their horses plodded steadily upward. Lucas noticed Amelia humming softly a hymn of thanksgiving. By mid-afternoon hoofbeats announced visitors. 3 neighboring families arrived with tools and lumber stacked in wagons. Thought you could use some help rebuilding? Tom Wilson called out, already rolling up his sleeves. Men worked together, hammering new planks into place while women gathered in the cabin. The smell of roasting venison filled the air as they prepared. A feast. Fresh bread browned near the hearth, and jars of apple preserves sparkled in lamb-plouge tea. Evening brought them all around the long table, shoulders touching as they squeezed together. Stories flowed like warm honey tales of miners singing in the depths, of wives waiting with lanterns, of children playing in summer dust. My James always said grace with such feeling. One widow shared, tears mixing with her smile. Another laughed, remembering her Thomas's terrible attempts at cooking. Lucas watched the faces around him, bright with firelight and fellowship. I reckon you all taught me what family means again, he said quietly. Wasn't sure I'd ever find that after losing Sarah. Amelia touched his arm gently. Faith carried us through. When strength wasn't enough, she reminded him. The Lord provides. Family where we least expect it. Lamplight danced across walls that now held more than shelter, they held hope, healing, and the warmth of hearts knit together through trial and triumph. Snow piled deeper around the cabin as January settled in. But inside, warmth and contentment filled every corner. The restored fence lines stood sturdy against winter winds, marking their victory over those who had tried to drive them away. Fragrant wood smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of fresh-baked bread and stewed venison. Twice each, weak children from town trudged up through the drifts, their voices lifting in hymns that made the cabin ring with praise. Lucas found himself singing along, his deep voice joining the chorus of Amazing Grace and Sweet Hour of Prayer. These days, the evening meal stretched long with conversation and laughter. Lucas no longer ate alone, finding his place among 5 women who had become more than tenants. They were family. Bound by trials weathered together, one quiet evening as flames crackled in the hearth, Amelia's eyes sparkled with mischief. Remember what I asked you that first night? She tilted her head. You can handle all 5 of us. Lucas chuckled, his expression soft in the lamplight. With God's help, yes, he answered. voice steady and sure, and more besides. They bowed their heads together, giving thanks. Outside, snow hushed the world in white silence. But within those timber walls, faith had built something stronger than wood and nails, a true home, filled with love and hope that would last through all seasons to come. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.